But the next breadcrumb is a visual one, where we see Amber's powers not just cut off after fusing with Pyrrha, but they go back to her. Now, this is important because we see the transfer having some kind of impact on Pyrrha herself. Their auras and life forces are fusing together, but the process is cut short by Cinder's arrow. So when Amber is killed by Cinder, and the corrupted connection between the two of them takes full effect, and Cinder steals the maiden's powers, there's something that we have to consider. That those exact same powers that she is stealing were just fusing with Pyrrha. Now, as we know from the rest of the fight that plays out afterwards, Pyrrha has no maiden abilities to speak of, but she still puts up an incredible fight nonetheless. However, she's completely outclassed by Cinder, who now wields the Fallen Maiden's abilities, and so Cinder kills her. However, before she is murdered, Pyrrha asks if she, Cinder, believes in destiny. Again, this is a line that is basically a throwaway if we just take it at face value. And then Ruby comes in and defeats Cinder with her Deus Ex Silver Eyes, which, as a side note, I'm really happy that we're finally learning more about that special power, but it could have been handled so much better from the beginning. That aside, we see Cinder later recovering at Salem's palace, and she's clearly not herself. Barely able to speak, unable to use the powers she had just flaunted in the previous season, and getting shocked by things that the previous callous Cinder wouldn't have flinched at all. There's obviously something going on here. Finally, the last of the breadcrumbs in this trail so far is Oscar and Ozpin's relationship. And we should also include in this, I guess, Jin's revelation about who Ozpin is. Commanded and empowered by the Brother of Light, one of Remnant's two gods, Ozpin, once known as Ozma, must ready humanity for the god's return and find a way to defeat Salem, his lover. In order to complete, and as a result of his impossibly long quest to do these things, Ozpin has shared the bodies and consciousnesses of many other individuals, and they have all melded into his life and become a part of him. And as a result, Oscar fears that the same will happen to him in due time. So when you take all of these things together, Pyrrha being briefly melded with the powers of the Fall Maiden, those powers then being taken by Cinder, who acts slightly out of character until she regains herself in Season 5, and the very nature of Ozpin, who shares bodies and consciousnesses with other people, you can see the potential return for Pyrrha. Now, there is one final kicker, at least in my opinion. The mysterious red-haired woman. That is her official designation. In the listing, she is not listed as Pyrrha's mother, and while that is a very popular theory, her sudden disappearance and the things she says directly to Jean, quite frankly, don't add up entirely. And honestly, I will admit we need more information before we can draw any major conclusion from this interaction. But not only was that a scene to help Jean, Ren, and Nora move on from Pyrrha's death, it is a reminder that we should not forget Pyrrha. So that was the trail of breadcrumbs, as far as I've been able to follow it. And here are the answers I promised to give you earlier. You see, I believe that Cinder has a part of Pyrrha's soul within her, and that this part of a much purer soul could manifest itself under the right conditions. And just as we have seen with Oscar and Ozpin, Oz is able to take control of Oscar's body against his will, and I think that the same could possibly happen between Pyrrha and Cinder. And this also, as a kind of fun side note, would feed in an interesting way into Salem and Ozpin's weird conversation throughout seasons 1 through 3 about how a smaller soul could make all the difference. Now, that's just pure speculation right there, but I think that's kind of interesting to point out. But what is, however, very concrete is that the board is now set for a very possible and basically inevitable confrontation in Atlas, where, may I remind you, the aura transferring technology was developed. And this confrontation will be between Ruby and her friends, and Cinder and her allies. So things could get pretty interesting. Now to address the issue of Jean's character arc, because I think this is really important. It was already a given that Jean would stick to Ruby's side and help save the world. And we have seen him over time move on from Pyrrha's death. But we know that he still wants revenge. And what is a better way to complicate the tired and overdone revenge arc trope than by throwing Pyrrha back into it? Jean is known for his friendliness and overall goodness. What will he do if it is revealed that part of Pyrrha is actually within Cinder? Such a confrontation brings even greater meaning now to Pyrrha's comment about destiny and her death, and it would give an amazing level of nuance and depth to the show. Pyrrha died to save Jean, and now Jean is given a chance to save at least a part of her, or to condemn her to death once again. And his decision would have a big impact on what happens with Oscar and Ozpin, because, well, once again, this comes down to the fact that Oscar is afraid of losing himself to Oz. And because we know Cinder is not going anywhere anytime soon, these developments could very well happen. If the gang were somehow to awaken Pyrrha, and Pyrrha's life force and soul would then take over Cinder's body, Oscar would be very interested in knowing how exactly that happened, because maybe he might, through that avenue, learn a clue of how he might not lose himself to Ozpin. And for extra goodies, a Pyrrha-controlled Cinder herself could become a mole and a threat within the party itself. And that would prove to be a very good and convenient way that the relics could be stolen from Team Ruby without it just simply being a boring snatch and grab from the villains. There are a ton of possibilities that come from this particular scenario. So I've addressed the blatant problems that fans would have with this theory of mine, but I am willing to admit that this is nothing more than a theory